Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another video. And this is part 2 of my favourite 200 films of 2022. This is the second half, or the second part of the alphabet, from the letters L to Z. Again, these are not ranked or in any order apart from the letter alphabet, strangely enough. This is just, again, an exercise to put where are my kind of favourite films of the year 2022. Obviously, if I was to do a list next month, it would probably be different. One day, I have been promising for a while, but one day I will do my favourite 10 films of all time, even though there'll probably be 30 films in that list. But what are the films? Because there's a few films in here that I will mention as far as being in the argument for being in my favourite 10 films of all time, but I've never actually done that because that would be just crazy. But there's certainly 20 or 30 films that are in the argument for my favourite 10 films of all time. So this is really just a pin in the map of 2022 and where my viewing habits have been, really, as far as there'll be old favourites that will always be in a top 200 or top 100 list, and then there's just flowing entries in and out like the great river of life. So we'll start with the letter L, and we'll start with Giuseppe Tornatore's fantastic Legend of 1900. Try and get the director's cut, which is almost 3 hours long. It's a film that, if you go with it, like quite a lot of Tornatore's work, if you go with it, you'll get rewarded. If you're cynical about it or rigid with it as far as believability, then you're probably not going to like it. You know, at one point, Tim Roth drives a piano up and down a cruise ship during a storm. It's got an amazing Morricone score, and it's just an absolute gem that is still underseen. But again, you have to go with it and not be cynical. It is kind of in that realm of realistic fantasy, but it's absolutely tremendous. Life and Death of Colonel Blimp by the Archers. Stunning print. For years this was lost and butchered, but it's fantastic to see in its full form and all its glory. Deborah Kerr in 3 different roles, Roger Livesey and Anton Walbrook. Sensational. Another Archer's masterpiece, ho-hum. Next, The Long Good Friday, Bob Hoskins' finest 2 hours, who is indeed having a go at him. Endlessly quotable. The only thing that perhaps hasn't aged that well is the score, but it's top class Bob Hoskins. Lawrence of Arabia. Yes, the second half isn't as good as the first half, but this has a lot of sentimental value for me as well, apart from the wonderful Peter O'Toole performance and the somewhat darker undertones to the film. It's a film that can be enjoyed in quite a lot of levels. Next, Yorgos Lanthimos' The Lobster, This is one of those films that just absolutely blew me away. I had seen Dogtooth by Lanthimos before I saw this, but this is an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. My opinion is not fact, obviously, but just sensational on every single level. You're probably either going to like it or absolutely hate it, but that's kind of like most Lanthimos films, I think. Bill Forsyth's Local Hero, a film that almost glows. A wonderful tale of small village Scotland against capitalism. From Texas, wonderful turns by Fulton Mackay, Peter Capaldi, and the wonderful Burt Lancaster. This was one that was waiting for a Blu-ray for years as well, and then Criterion released it. It got a Region B UK release as well. An absolute gem in everything that word entails. It's actually a film that will make you feel good, which not all of these films in this list will. Lone Star, let the sales films start hitting this alphabet. There will be a few of them in here. Lone Star's beautifully edited, again about how the past, you can't really escape it. The generational through lines are everywhere, and again another sales film that needs a Blu-ray, but you can say that just about all these films. Oh, it's another John Sayles film, Limbo, starring Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, even though there's not a T in her name, but I'm giving her a T. And the wonderful David Strathairn. It's got one of the greatest endings of all time. Another wonderful turn by Chris Christopherson. People are upset at the ending, even though it's the clue's kind of in the name of the film. Last Year in Marienbad. People who aren't used to art house films or non-mainstream films, show them Limbo, then show them Last Year in Marienbad, and they'll probably never bother you again. Next, another Billy Wilder, The Lost Weekend with Ray Milland. Ray Milland's favourite two films that he ever did are in this half of the alphabet. Another Billy Wilder. There's quite a few Billy Wilders in this alphabet. Michael Mann's Manhunter. One of the best serial killer films of all time. One of the best films in the 80s. We all know Brian Cox is the best Hannibal Lecter, and it's not even close. Try and see the European video cut of the film. The director's cut is the best you can get on Blu-ray, but it does have two unnecessary scenes which the European video cut doesn't have, and don't bother watching the theatrical cut because it's butchered. Intense, a film full of threat, wonderful compositional choices by Michael Mann. It's just an absolute masterpiece. Miller's Crossing, my favourite Coen Brothers film, and this is one of the films that's in my imaginary top 10. I should actually say Manhunter is in my imaginary top 10 as well. Miller's Crossing, the language, the world building that the Coen Brothers do, the performances, it is a film that is literally perfect, and I will die on a mountain somewhere saying that. Maybe in North Africa. My American Uncle by Elaine Rennie. Again, another film that badly needs a Blu-ray. I've battered on about this film quite often in my channel. It's a film that will make you reassess your entire existence, especially if you think that you're unique and your experiences are only belong to you. This film will throw a custard pie in your face if you believe that. Midnight Run, one of the best potty-mouthed buddy movies of all time. De Niro proving he could do comedy before he just did comedy all the time, but really badly. He actually, yes, he mugs a little bit in this, but this is the definitive De Niro comedy turn. Charles Grodin's absolutely fantastic as his foil. Great support by Dennis Farina, who's truly terrifying, and the wonderful Yaphet Kotto. It's an absolute blast. Joe Pants is in it as well. It's another John Sayles film. Matewan, again, I've said enough about Matewan. You should all own a copy by now. It's another John Sayles film. They just happen to be close together, that's all. Men with Guns from 1997, starring the wonderful Federico Luppi, or Luppi, from Kronos, about a doctor in a Central American country, or a South American country, who goes into the countryside looking for all his student doctors, and he finds out they've all been killed along the way. It's a wonderful road movie as he meets several characters. It's beautiful, it's brutal. This was Sayles' follow-up to Lone Star, which he got an Oscar nomination for the script. So what did he do? He made a film about South America and didn't make it in English. It's another one of his masterpieces. Yes, I'm biased, so I'll probably overinflate all the ratings of his films, but I don't really care. This one it's absolutely fantastic, and it quite upsets me that hardly anybody's seen it. Many Wars Ago by Francesco Rossi. This is another one of the Italian masterpieces that I've seen in the last 18 months or so. Not by Fellini or Antonioni. This is Rossi's World War I film with Gian Maria Volonté that is just stunning. This is the Raro Blu-ray. It's an absolute stunner. It goes in places where you don't think it will go, but it does. It has some cliches of war films, but it also subverts some of them as well. This is a beautiful print, and this was a complete revelation. And it's another powerhouse performance by Volonté, and just another fantastic Rossi film. I think he's got 3 entries in this list, I think. Something a bit different. Mad Max Fury Road. This is a film which I thought it was okay when it came out, but it's endlessly rewatchable. People complain because it's not really a Mad Max film. It's a Furiosa Charlize Theron film. She is getting a prequel, apparently. But people kind of forget that Mad Max 2 and 3 with Mel Gibson weren't really Mad Max films either. He was just the character, but it was everybody else's stories that were kind of more interesting, and he was helping the way he helps in this one. It's arguably the simplest film ever made. Everybody goes in one direction, everybody turns around and comes back in the same direction. But the fact that it was 99% of its practical effects, how countless people weren't killed when they made it. Apparently there is a book that you should read about the making of it. Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron absolutely hated each other. It's amazing it ever got finished and nobody was killed. But it is a film I literally could watch every day. I'm not saying it's a great film or anything, but I'm just saying it's a film I could watch every single day, and I don't know why. Next is Ray Milland's second out of his two favourite performances, or his two favourite films he ever made. Roger Corman's The Man with X-Ray Eyes. Roger Corman does more in about 80 minutes in this film that quite a lot of filmmakers do in about half of their career. It's a film about seeing too much. You could argue we've all seen a bit too much. Next is another revelation from last year, Manila and the Claws of Light from the Philippines in 1975, about a guy who comes from the countryside to the big city and gets torn apart basically by city life in more ways than one. It's an emotionally devastating film, and it has another fantastic ending, somewhat different than the feeling you'll get from watching Local Hero. Next, it's another Joseph Losey, Mr. Klein, with Alain Delon, slightly older, more mature Alain Delon. As a man in Paris in 1942 who exploits Jews who are trying to get out of the city by giving them money for their art, who thinks he's untouchable, but he seems to have a doppelganger, and he seems to be getting more interest from the authorities than he would like. It has that kind of jaded, melancholy feel. Delon is a bit older. He has a kind of more jaundiced, melancholy look to him. It's an elegant film, but it's an elegance with the kind of yellowing around the corners, and he doesn't realise what's going on until it's way too late. Yeah, talking about realising things. Costa Gravis Missing from Indicator. Another brilliant Jack Lemmon performance, ably assisted by Sissy Spacek, about a couple who go down to South America, Central America, to try and find their missing son. Jack Lemmon's character, as he changes from being annoyed at his son and getting involved with hippies and protesting and all of that nonsense, because the government always does what's right and always does what's in the interest of the American people, and the government wouldn't do shady deals with shady characters or anything just for money, and he slowly realises that might not be the case. It's interesting as his clothes change, as his persona changes, as his body language changes, as the way he walks changes, as he gets more and more, not necessarily of the truth, but more and more idea that perhaps the government doesn't actually have the individual American in its interest. It's a film that's just about all talk, but it's absolutely riveting, and it's one of Lemmon's best performances. Even though I have realised that I have left off another Jack Lemmon film, but that might be on next year's list. Miami Vice. I recently did a video of the first season of the TV show, and I mentioned in that the first time I saw it I thought it was good, but then on every single rewatch it just gets better and better and better. So much so that you wish it was about 4 hours long. Another Saijit Ray, The Music Room, about the passing of age, the passing of time, as a landowner gets used to the fact that it's a completely different age, and some things just don't go. Again, another film about melancholy, and you can almost smell the dust of a dying age. Next, Clouseau's debut, The Murderer Lives at 21, which is a wonderful little potboiler about a detective who goes undercover into a boarding house to try and find who's been killing people. It's rather fantastic for a debut, and it's an absolute joy. Lots of interesting, fascinating little characters in that. Clouseau sardonic, cynical thread that goes through pretty much all of his films. Next, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This could easily be Life of Brian, and if I do this next year, both of them might be on it. It's usually just a toss-up about what mood you're in. Again, another wonderful ending. This is another cheat, as I do tend to do. 3 Naked Gun films, just taken as one. Again, this is my favourite 200, obviously not the best 200, because these are objectively not great films per se, in all the parameters that you'd call a great film. But the world has become a much shitter place without Leslie Nielsen, and whenever you are in need of cheering up, I do tend to put on a Naked Gun film or Police Squad, and it does the job. Next is The Natural, a perfect example of Hollywood doing sentimentality and schmaltz and corn, but for me it works. It shouldn't. Adapted from a book in which the hero strikes out at the end, and of course Robert Redford doesn't strike out at the end. Pure Hollywood magic, but it kind of works, even though it shouldn't, and I understand if you don't like it. Again, another one that's in, well, it is in my all-time top 10, and it might be my favourite film of all time, and it might be the straw that breaks the 4K camel's back, wherever that 4K camel lives. If Once Upon a Time in the West got a 4K, then I would have to maybe seriously consider mulling over getting 4K. But that's a camel for a different day. 168 minutes or whatever it is, and it's just about perfect. Pretty hard to do. Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive, with Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston. Is that his name? I don't even know his name. Who I usually don't like, but he's tolerable in this. It's got a great score by Squirrel. It just has a wonderful feel, as Jarmusch's take on the vampire mythos is a lot more successful than his take on the zombie mythos, Dead Don't Die. This is an elegant film, beautiful, melancholy, and just absolutely succulent. Speaking of Tilda Swinton, that's just coincidence that they came back to back. Orlando, Sally Potter's just absolutely gorgeous, wonderful, not time travel, but it follows one character over 500 years who changes sex halfway through. Beautifully mounted, but enough of our character. Looks beautiful, sounds beautiful, a revelation, and you need to see it on Blu-ray on a screen as big as possible. Jean Cocteau's Orphée, 1950, again a film that's like a dream. Who cares about narrative drive and narrative sense when you've got Jean Marais and rubber gloves? Next, surprise, surprise, it's another Italian masterpiece that I had no idea existed. This is Mario Monicelli's The Organizer with Mastroianni, but Mastroianni not as ladies' man clean and polished. This is Mastroianni as a unshaven hobo type professor type union organizer who's involved in a textile factory stalemate. This film is funny, it's moving, it's brutal, it's shocking, it's humane, it's powerful, it's relevant, it's Region A, and along with the Ballad of Gregorio Cortez that I mentioned in part 1 of this alphabet of favourite films, The Organizer is a film that you should really try and get a hold of as soon as you watch this video, because it's a stunner. Next, on Dangerous Ground, Nicholas Ray. Yes, we would quite like to see the version of the film that Nicholas Ray actually wanted to make. It was butchered a little bit by the studio, but we still have the kernel of this terrific film. Robert Ryan is a little bit too violent cop who, after he's beaten up one too many witnesses or suspects, not beating up witnesses, or informants, gets sent up country to look into a murder, and he gets involved with Ida Lupino, who plays a blind woman. It's just a beautiful, strange little film that is one of those films of two halves. Similar, for example, in the reverse, Carol Franklin's One False Move, which is getting an imprint Blu-ray release soon, which is very exciting. Yeah, it's even what remains of the 82-minute version is a wonderful gem that, again, for years wasn't available. Next, Parallax View, 1974. An absolute paranoid masterpiece and one of the greatest 70s endings, and you know what that means. Peeping Tom. It's another John Sayles film. Arguably my favourite John Sayles film. Passion Fish. Another wonderful synopsis. Soap opera actress gets hit by taxi, paralysed, goes back home to the bayou, goes through lots of housekeepers until she meets Alfred Woodard, meets an old flame, David Strathairn, and it should be 12 hours long. It's just, you want to spend the rest of your life with these characters, and it's just absolutely fantastic. From Predator and Passion Fish, that's a nice double bill. Yes, once it's Arnie and the Predator, it does kind of lose its way a little bit, but just absolutely wonderful. Another Italian masterwork, Property is No Longer a Theft, by Elio Petri, about a bank worker who's allergic to money, who wants to ruin the life of a local butcher who seems to have everything. So one by one he takes away what the butcher has. Another wonderful Morricone score. Almost said Morricone script. It's just full of so much satirical content. It's wonderfully done. Still has some odd Petri touches. Just another essential Italian film that you really should watch. That's not Fellini or Antonioni and those guys. Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise. Again, I only saw this for the first time about 4 years ago. Or I think I might have seen it in Moviedrome, but forgot about it for 20 years. Absolutely wonderful. Cross between Phantom of the Paradise, Picture of Dorian Gray and Faust. And it has some great tunes by Paul Williams, who did the songs in Bugsy Malone. Sam Fuller's Pickup in South Street. Victor Sonnstrom's The Phantom Carriage. Absolutely mesmerising 1921 silent. About the end of the year, death takes the last person and then they drive his phantom carriage for the following year. Victor Sonnstrom also stars as a real piece of shit. Stunning imagery. Again, the camera tricks by today's standards are rudimentary, but again, there's a feel to it, an atmosphere to it, and you can't do atmosphere with CGI. Bombshell. Privilege by Peter Watkins. This was a Nazarene Prod recommendation, and it's another stunner from Peter Watkins. He also did War Game and Culloden, amongst other things. Still relevant, about the power of fame and government controlling the message. Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. One of the greatest titles of all time. This is the only film Tom Stoppard directed, based on his own play about the two minor characters in Hamlet. Wonderful turns with Tim Roth and Gary Oldman. They do make a wonderful pair. Richard Dreyfuss turns up as the leader of the players. Ian Glenn as Hamlet. And this is really Rosencrantz and Guildenstern on the fringes of the play. They go in and out of the play, but most of the time they're bemused by why they're there. A film I could watch all day long. Great wordplay, great chemistry between the two leads, and just an absolute blast. Rocky Horror Picture Show, who's been in this list for years, but Phantom of the Paradise might have actually knocked it off the top of my favourite musicals. Again, as you all know, I'm a bit strange, so this might be my favourite Sam Peckinpah film, Ride the High Country, which, seeing it on Blu-ray, makes it look even better. It does have a wonderful relationship between two men, Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea, as ageing gunfighters who go on this mission. At one point, perhaps they don't see eye to eye, but they still respect each other. It still has that melancholy, elegiac feel of the Wild Bunch, but this just does it in an hour and a half as opposed to the slightly bloated Wild Bunch, which is still great, obviously. But this is kind of the Peckinpah film that doesn't get enough credit, I don't think. It's really tight at 94 minutes. It was 1962, so he perhaps wasn't as loaded as he was in his other films. Arguably Randolph Scott's best performance, I don't know. Reservoir Dogs, the only Tarantino film that will come anywhere near the favourite 200. Still my favourite. I think it's still his best because it's his shortest. It would be interesting to see if he made it now. Would it be 2.5 hours long? Would we see Mr. Blonde shooting everybody in the bank. Quite possibly there'd probably be subplots about women's feet. I don't know. But for me, still my favourite and still his best. Sweet Smell of Success, one of the best scripts ever written, and even though it was made in 1955, there's something slightly dirty and uneasy about the film. Seven Samurai, one of those template films that's been remade 703 times. Shop Around the Corner, slightly less or underseen Lubitsch, but absolutely classic Lubitsch. Just people you want to spend time with. And the finest performance by the Wizard of Oz, outside Oz obviously. Powell and Pressburger's The Spy in Black, which is one of my favourite Powell and Pressburger films. It would actually rank pretty high in my favourites, even though objectively they have lots of films that are probably better than The Spy in Black. Conrad Veidt, as a German submarine captain whose mission is to sink British fleet, and you're on his side. You're actually quite upset when it doesn't go well for him. And that's just the power of Pressburger's writing and Powell's directing. Again, they've made films that are better than this, but this is a favourites list, and I just absolutely adore The Spy in Black. Conrad Veidt is absolutely fantastic, but we all know that anyway. Next, Melville's La Samurai. As I said in part 1, Army of Shadows and La Samurai are the two that make this list in 2022, but after I rewatch some Melville, I'm sure there might be another couple that will make the list. There's too many films, that's the problem. Frankenheimer's Seconds. It might not be his best, but this is my favourite, and it's not too far off his best, I don't think. Yeah, the moral of the story is careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Yeah, brutal, scary, still disturbing all these years later. Sancho Deu, Sancho the Bailiff, Mizoguchi's happy-go-lucky tale of two children who are split apart, a family that's split apart really, brutal but beautiful, if that makes any sense. And then we have another Hal Hartley, Simple Men. I'll be mentioning another Hal Hartley film in that set in a little bit. Next we have arguably Kurosawa's most underrated film, possibly, Stray Dog, a contemporary film from 1949. Toshiro Mifune, who loses his police revolver or his police gun, and Takashi Shimura, the veteran cop who takes him under his wing to try and find it. Just wonderful. I don't really have too much profound things to say about Stray Dog, apart from the fact it's absolutely wonderful. Kitano's Sonatine, which I actually saw in a cinema, blew me away. Great support by Terajima, as always. Next is just a DVD only disc one that I've got, and it's Joseph Mankiewicz's Sleuth from 1972 with Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier. Again, why does that not have a Blu-ray? I know Brian at Just the Discs did a video on why doesn't this have a Blu-ray, and I concur. It's ridiculous that that doesn't have a Blu-ray. Of course, the remake with Michael Caine and Jude Law has got about 3 different editions on Blu-ray. I've never seen it, strangely enough. Uberto Pasolini's Still Life with Eddie Marsan. I did a random review of this a while ago. This film absolutely broke me. I was weeping like a small child when I saw this. It's about a man who pretty much investigates and tries to clean up the estates of people who live alone and die alone. So it was certainly resonant to me. It's just a beautiful film, beautiful performance by Eddie Marsan. I think I said at the time on the review, you'll either go with the ending and it'll break you, or again you'll be cynical about it. But the film is a perfect example of a film that struck me personally. Somebody else might watch it and just not be affected by it. But his character's story, because I saw a lot of myself in his character, like I say, it absolutely broke me at the end. And it's so underrated, and it should really get a Blu-ray. Kurosawa's Sanjuro, the light, happy comedy sequel with the somewhat brutal ending. I think this is the last John Sayles film, Sunshine State. Slow West, a modern film, yes. 2015. This is just a beautiful Western. Michael Fassbender. And I just love the montage at the end of the film. I won't say what the montage is, but it's a beautiful montage and gives you perspective. But beautifully shot, beautifully acted. And one of the real gems of the 2010s, and I don't say that very often, even though I've just mentioned Still Life, which was 2013, so that kind of counts as a 2010, doesn't it? David Lynch's The Straight Story. This is the imprint Blu-ray. Again, when this came out, it surprised a lot of people, and this isn't a David Lynch film, but it's completely a David Lynch film. The imprint has lots of really good extras that go into exactly how much of a David Lynch film this is. Just a great performance by Richard Farnsworth before he would die soon after. A great couple of moments by Harry Dean Stanton. Wonderful score by Angelo Badalamenti, which is also a little bit different than the usual Badalamenti Lynch collaboration as far as the score. Beautiful film in every way. Next, it's another Billy Wilder, Sunset Boulevard. Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre, which is coming up in my Jodorowsky episode 4, whenever I get around to doing it. Das Ding by John Carpenter. You may have heard me mention that one before. The Third Man. I should say The Thing is probably in the discussion for top 10 films of all time, as is The Third Man. The Third Man's always in the conversation, my favourite film of all time. I don't know why I just don't say it's my favourite film of all time, but it's in the conversation, my favourite film of all time. I would have to do all the analytics and all the stats to back that up before I made such a wild statement. But another film that's just about perfect. Again, slight cheat. 3 Colours trilogy. I don't really need to cheat when it comes to Shklovsky. Ernst Lubitsch, To Be or Not to Be. For me, his finest hour and a half. Carol Lombard's sadly final and finest hour and a half. Spinal Tap. Allegedly, well, I know allegedly they're going to do a sequel, but allegedly there's 10 hours of footage from the first film. It's just like, just release a super 5-hour cut of the first film and not bother doing a sequel, for goodness sake. Joseph Sargent's The Taking of Pelham 123. Quintessential Robert Shaw and Walter Matthau performances, and again another wonderful ending. Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, just awe-inspiring. Whenever you go, oh, I could make a film, then watch The Thin Red Line and go, nah, I couldn't make a film. What would be the point? Things Change. Again, I've mentioned this as one of the essential indicators. Again, it was another film that I was always hoping to get on Blu-ray. This is the non-sweary Mammoth. If you're only used to sweary Mammoth, this is the non-sweary family film Mammoth, with great performances by Don Amici and Joe Mantegna. And the extras on the indicator disc, the interview with Joe Mantegna, will make you cry when he talks about just how wonderful a person Don Amici was. 2001, I don't actually have it on an individual disc. This is just the Kubrick box set. 2001, it's like, I know how they did those things, but every time I watch it, it's still like jaw-droppingly good. 12 Angry Men. Even though, to be fair, quite a lot of them aren't really angry. 30 Days of Night. A really wonderful next-gen vampire film, which actually showed vampires to be thoroughly scary and nasty and animalistic and horrible and brutal, instead of swanning about in dressing gowns. The 13th Warrior, which this German Blu-ray actually comes with a little booklet. John McTiernan's butchered but still brilliant riff on Seven Samurai with Antonio Banderas. Completely preposterous plot, but it's still stunning and moving. You'll want to visit Valhalla after watching it. The Dardennes, 2 Days, 1 Night. Again, I could have picked quite a few Dardenne films, but this one's an absolute stunner. Again, it's about something we could all relate to. A woman has been off sick from her work, goes back to her work, but the boss says he can only take her back if everybody else doesn't get a bonus, or they can get a bonus but she loses her job. And it's that moral dilemma as she spends a weekend trying to convince people not to take the bonus. Forget galaxies far, far away or combined universes. This is about as gripping as cinema gets. Another Kurosawa, Throne of Blood, or Kurosawa's Weather Report. Tales of Hoffmann, it's another Archers. I haven't actually counted how many Powell and Pressburger films are on this list. Another one that they made lots more films that are better. It's not a perfect film, but it's a film that shows you the only limit of cinema is your imagination. Fire Walk with Me. Touch of Evil. Really good chili. Trust by Hal Hartley. Absolutely wonderful. Back to Orson Welles for The Trial. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Tremors. Sadly, we lost Fred Ward recently. But very much like Seven Samurai, this is a template film. This is how to do creature features properly. Sequels, not so much. Another one that I've just got on DVD disc only. 32 short films about Glenn Gould by Francois Girard. As I said in my video, like I did a neglected gem on it a while back. You know, most biopics are really boring because they just do chronological, whereas this is literally Glenn Gould, the famous pianist. 32 short films about his life that are fairly random. Some are just audio, some are made up, some are imaginary, some are from interviews, and it just makes it a lot more interesting, and you actually piece together what kind of person Glenn Gould actually was. It's a really interesting, wonderful film. Next, Jacques Becker, Le Trou. Now, for me, arguably the best prison film of all time. Becker is a filmmaker I got into the last year, 18 months as well. So many good films. Sadly, another director who died way too early. Michael Mann's Thief with James Caan, aka Violent Streets. An early appearance by Dennis Farina, and career best work from Willie Nelson and Robert Prosky. Robert Prosky is truly scary in this film, and James Belushi is really good as well. Tushy Pal Grisby, which I've mentioned quite often as well. Another Jack Becker, strange enough. Was Jean Gabin, Jean Moreau, and Lino Ventura. I think it's either Lino Ventura's first film or one of his first films. And Ventura and Gabin are kind of the two ages of gangsters, two eras of gangsters, the old school and new school, and they inevitably clash. Just really good, and another wonderful Studio Canal release, because it's got an interview with Jeanette Von Sandu, who does a lot of good work on French cinema and the Studio Canal releases. Next, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. One of the few video nasties that actually still stands up, and is still dirty and horrible. Yes, some of the acting is quite bad, but then again, it just adds to the feeling that it's not really acting. It's still has an effect, which a lot of the video nasties just don't. Vanishing Point from 1971 wouldn't have existed without Easy Rider, but for me, and again, my opinion is not fact, it's probably 27.3 times better than Easy Rider. Tsukamoto's Vital, which is vital. The Vanishing by George Sluzier, the original, obviously. Still creepy and unnerving to this day. Next, Dreyer's Vampire, which I've recently done a boutique label battle. This is the new 90th anniversary edition from Eureka Masters of Cinema. And this is the Criterion Region A Blu-ray. Both wonderful. Cronenberg's Videodrome. This is another life-changing stunner. Bondarchuk's War and Peace. Pure art for 7 hours. Just like Human Condition, should have watched it years ago. Just an absolute... I mean, the huge paintings you see of the Napoleonic Wars in art galleries, the whole film is like that. Again, I don't know how many frames are in 422 minutes, but you could literally pause every frame and stick it in a museum. This was a reaction to Hollywood's Henry Fonda, Audrey Hepburn War and Peace. So if that didn't exist and the Russians weren't so annoyed with the American adaptation, they wouldn't have made this. Bondarchuk, I think, had a couple of heart attacks while he made it. It's just a completely insane undertaking. The burning of the city at the end, they literally built a large part of a city, put tracks all around it, and then like set it on fire. No CGI fire in this one. The Russian government opened up about 50 odd museums and let them have the props, so it would be historically accurate in the props. A completely insane undertaking, but an absolutely stunning film on every single level. It's eye melting. The end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's what your eyes will be like after watching it. With an Eye, arguably the best British comedy of the last 50 years, even though there's no jokes in it. We're getting there. Bergman's Wild Strawberries. Again, this gets made more and more emotional the older I get, which is older by the day. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Gene Wilder's best performance, because it has that darkness running through it, and we won't talk about the tunnel. What happens in the tunnel stays in the tunnel. And finally, Yojimbo. Maybe next year Zardos might make it, but Yojimbo is where the alphabet stops. And this favourite 200 films, circa 2022. So thanks so much for watching. Again, I'll maybe think about a top 10 favourite list, but obviously with about 30 films in it. But that might give me a little bit of a headache. Because originally I was actually thinking about ranking these 200, but that's completely ridiculous. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know what your favourite films beginning with the letter L to Z are, and hopefully you'll join me again for more videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films saying, if you made it to the end, well done, give yourself a reward, and farewell